long version of my feminist tier list. Judith Butler, B tier. Butler is someone who I have complicated feelings about. Judith Butler is great. Judith Butler has done great work. Judith Butler continues to do great work, has done some really great work advocating on behalf of transgender people. But the thing about Judith Butler is that no one understands performativity. Not a lot of people understand performativity, but performativity is very famously misunderstood, as in gender is just a performance, which is not what Butler is arguing. And my theory is that if you've had people misinterpreting your famous theory for 30 years, that might be a sign that you explained it badly. And the other thing about Judith Butler, the reason Judith Butler's not any higher is because what actual great ideas does Judith Butler have? The idea that gender is socially constructed? I mean, you know, that had already been advanced by all sorts of people. What does Judith Butler have that Monique Fatigue doesn't have, that Shulamith Firestone or Alan Fausto Sterling doesn't have? And that doesn't mean that Judith Butler's work isn't good. Judith Butler's work is good, but it just means that Judith Butler's work isn't groundbreaking or, because ultimately Judith Butler's theory of performativity doesn't do a great job of accounting for the role of male supremacy in the construction and enforcement of gender. Bell Hooks also gets a B tier. Bell Hooks, another person I have complicated feelings about. Bell Hooks is... I feel like Bell Hooks is maybe like the most widely read black feminist. Maybe not the, definitely one of the most. And Bell Hooks has some really great stuff. And definitely some of her best stuff is criticisms of racism within existing feminist thought and broadening that thought to include black women. And I think that what's great about Bell Hooks is that her writing is really accessible. Now, she has a bunch of books, and I've only read 3 of them. I've read Ain't I a Woman, Feminist Theory from Margin to Center, and Feminism is for Everybody. So I can't really comment on the rest, but just from those 3 books, she's kind of homophobic. Like, on paper, supports gay people, but you can just kind of see those biases creeping through. Barbara Smith has a really fantastic criticism of Bell Hooks' first book, Ain't I a Woman, in which she sort of makes the point that Bell Hooks' arguments are very inconsistent and don't cohere super well. Bell Hooks' criticism of the Combahee River Collective statement is very odd. She argues that the Combahee River Collective is racist. And then throughout her career, Bell Hooks loved telling feminists to be nicer to men. And I just don't fuck with that. I think there's a valid point to be made that uncritical misandry can be used as a shield for other forms of bigotry. For example, you can target black men and be racist by just saying, "Oh, I'm just speaking truth to power, I'm just hating men." And I think that that's worthy of criticism, but the idea that feminists need to be nicer to men, I think, is just kind of silly. I don't, if there were genuinely mainstream forms of like truly anti-male feminism, sure, but I just don't fuck with Bell Hooks, okay? Angela Davis, S tier. Angela Davis has done some really fantastic work on prison abolition. She has made that topic really accessible, and she's great for that. Women, Race, and Class is such a fantastic book. There's a number of books that sort of document feminist history and, racism within American feminism and tensions between black and white American feminists, all that sort of thing. But Women, Race, and Class, easily one of the best books. I was just rereading parts of it because I'm currently reading Susan Brown Miller's book, and Davis criticizes Brown Miller for some racism, which I'll get to when I talk about Brown Miller. But Davis is just so fantastic. Her work on prison abolition is really essential. And I think Davis is interesting because she is undeniably a feminist, but I think some of her most famous work, prison abolition, is not necessarily directly tied to feminism per se, but prison abolition is essential for feminism. Mary Daly. What the fuck is wrong with you? Now, Mary Daly is the author of a couple of famous books, most famously Beyond God the Father and Gyn Ecology. Now, Mary Daly is most well known in my brain. In my brain, most Mary Daly is most well known for arguing that transsexualism is a form of rapism. And Mary Daly's student, Janice Raymond, would write The Transsexual Empire, which included that famous line, all transsexuals rape women's bodies. So Mary Daly gets a what the fuck is wrong with you just for that. But she's also racist. Audre Lorde has a great letter criticizing that. She's also very bioessentialist, which bioessentialism is reactionary and racist and usually misogynistic. She's also so fucking self-righteous. She has this footnote in gynecology about how um lesbians who haven't deconstructed the male myths are not actually lesbians. They're just female homosexuals. And it's not totally clear who she's talking about, but I assume she's talking about butch femme lesbians. So this is basically a thing about how she's so much better than these other lesbians who are doing butch femme or sadomasochism or whatever. Mary Daly sucks so much. Catherine McKinnon. Now, I like Catherine McKinnon. Let's talk first about some of the issues with Catherine McKinnon. Catherine McKinnon is very famous for her work in anti-pornography and anti-prostitution feminism. Now, I'm not the biggest fan of the Dworkin McKinnon anti-pornography ordinance. I'm not the biggest fan of Dworkin and McKinnon's theories about pornography. But I think the much bigger issue is with the work around quote unquote prostitution. Uh, McKinnon is essentially responsible for the development of the Nordic model, which criminalizes buying sex but not selling sex. So the customer is breaking the law, the quote unquote prostitute or the sex worker is not. And that sounds great on paper. In practice, the way that anti brothel laws are implemented in countries with the Nordic model still allow police to target sex workers in traditionally punitive ways. And ultimately, because sex workers are pushed into the trade by economic incentives, just making it illegal doesn't solve the problem of those economic incentives. Sex work is part of a much broader global economy that includes a lot of other forms of exploitative work, and just making one of those forms of work illegal doesn't solve the problem of the global forces of capitalist exploitation. So, but Catherine McKinnon, so you might be thinking, why is she an A tier if there's all those problems with her work? She's an A tier because her work in the analysis of gender as a socially constructed category is really excellent. I really like her definition of womanhood, as in women are the political class defined by the expropriation of their sexuality. That's from her paper, Feminism, Marxism, and Method. And I think she is really great in terms of being a die-hard social constructionist. She has always resisted bioessentialism. She also criticizes Susan Brownmiller for Brownmiller's biological explanation for rape. This is in McKinnon's paper, From Theory to Practice, or What is a White Woman Anyway? Now, McKinnon's relationship with racism is interesting. She's definitely someone who tries to address it. I don't feel qualified to comment on how well she does it. The most famous paper is What is a White Woman Anyway? And I think that paper definitely has some problems. I think that paper also makes some solid points. So McKinnon is complicated. And in recent years, McKinnon has really planted her flag in the pro-trans camp. She has written some genuinely brilliant papers defending transgender people, especially transgender women, from a feminist perspective. Now, Andrea Dworkin, as I said in the original video, bit of a special case. S tier also, what the fuck is wrong with you? Dworkin, closely allied with McKinnon. So all of the issues with McKinnon, with the pornography and the prostitution, also applies to Dworkin. Dworkin is a really brilliant writer. She is so well read. She's able to weave together references to all these different complex sources, and she's really great at that. Her analysis leaves a lot to be desired, and she's on paper opposed to the bioessentialism, but that always doesn't always come through in practice. Oh, and there was also the whole thing about how she said that like Israel could be like a good model for women to have a country of their own. She wrote a whole book about that. Kimberly Crenshaw, uh intersectionality. She coined the term intersectionality in her 1989 paper Demarginalizing the Intersection of Race and Sex. That's a really great paper. That paper is famous for a reason. And it's not initially a like she didn't invent the analytical concept that black women experience a specific oppression for being black, for being women, and for being black women. You know, that had already been articulated, but she named it and she provided this framework that could A, highlight the experiences of black women, and B, be expanded to talk about all these other different types of groups. I totally consider that paper essential reading for any feminist. Barbara Smith, S tier, and I said S tier just for the Combahee River Collective statement. Now, Smith did not single handedly write the statement. This statement was drafted by a couple of members of the Combahee River Collective, of which Smith was one. The Combahee River Collective statement is so fantastic. I consider that maybe just the most succinct statement of feminist principles that I abide by. I think it's fantastic, and it's specifically a black feminist statement. So it provides a lot of great stuff that is specifically applicable to a black feminist perspective, and I think that that stuff is essential for any feminist. I love the Combahee River Collective statement. Beyond her work in that, Smith also has a book called The Truth That Never Hurts, which is a collection of essays that she wrote. And I don't think anything in there is like groundbreaking essential reading, but it's a very good book. And I particularly like her black lesbian literary criticism, which I just reread because I was reading But Some of Us Are Brave, and that essay is in that book. So Barbara Smith is great. Susan Stryker. Susan Stryker's interesting because she's not necessarily a feminist per se. Like, she has definitely worked within feminism, but her main discipline is transgender studies, and Susan Stryker's most famous essay is My Words to Victor Frankenstein Above the Village of Chamonix Performing Transgender Rage, which is a fantastic essay for a reason. That essay is great. Um, she also has some other great stuff which has been collected in the book When Monsters Speak, which is great. I'd recommend that. She has a couple of other books, Transgender History, which just got a new third edition, which I hear is really good. Haven't read it yet. And so yeah, she's just kind of foundational for. She was one of the first trans women sort of articulating a specific trans woman's perspective. This is Elizabeth Cady Stanton, I believe, and she gets a "What the fuck is wrong with you?" She was a suffragist in the 19th century in the U.S., and when it became clear that black men and not white women would receive the vote, she pivoted really hard into racism and just like went off on black men and about how uneducated and illiterate they supposedly were. Not great. Simone de Beauvoir, the person, gets a "What the fuck is wrong with you?" because she got fired from her teaching position a couple of times for having sex with her students. And she would have threesomes with her and her husband, Jean Paul Sartre, and her students. But her book is pretty good. It definitely has its issues. I think there's a racial blindness where she does the women and blacks comparison, where she compares women and black people as if those are mutually exclusive groups. They don't have any overlap, which obviously they're not. So the second sex has its issues. It's definitely dated, but I think it's still a very solid book. But yeah, Simone de Beauvoir, the person, what the fuck's wrong with you? Gloria Steinem. I mean, she was a CIA operative, but like some of her books are kind of okay. Janice Raymond, she wrote the famous line, "All transsexuals rape women's bodies." What else do I need to say? Julia Serrano. She is best known for her book Whipping Girl, which is sort of the canonical text of transfeminism. It's a fantastic book, and Serrano has some really great insights. She coined the term transmisogyny, and her framework of traditional and oppositional sexism is really insightful. I think there are some oversights in Serrano's work. She doesn't really discuss the issues of race and class. That's a pretty significant oversight. And ultimately, in her discussion of the topic of femininity, she doesn't spend a lot of time interrogating what femininity actually means, how it's formed, how certain things come to be considered feminine. So I consider Serrano's work a great jumping off point for later transfeminist theorizing. Melissa Gira Grant is a former sex worker and author of the book Playing the Whore, which is explores the sex work economy and how that economy is structured, how it is punished by the law, and how it is intertwined with other forms of domestic work and service work. She also has a really great article in the Portable Feminist Reader called The Happy Hookers, I think. So she's just done some really great work from a sex worker perspective. Um, I also follow her on Blue Sky. She recently planted some common milkweed, and isn't that lovely? This is Susan B. Anthony, and she gets an F because she was best friends with hyper racist Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and Susan B. Anthony, to the extent of my knowledge, was not quite as explicitly racist. She was definitely still racist because she was in this kind of same thing, but she wasn't like dropping racist tirades about how stupid black men are. Like that was just her. I don't think Susan B. Anthony was doing that. If I'm wrong about that, let me know because yeesh. Sandy Stone is great. Sandy Stone is a trans woman who worked at the lesbian feminist music collective Olivia Records in the 70s and got bullied out of it by Janice Raymond. Janice Raymond was not participating at the label. The women at the label were glad to have Sandy Stone there, but Janice Raymond decided no and started a harassment campaign that ended in death threats and an attempt on Stone's life. In response, Stone would write the really terrific essay the Empire Strikes Back, a post transsexual manifesto, which essentially started the literary field of transgender studies as we know it today. Shulamith Firestone. Um, Shulamith Firestone is great, a central radical feminist. Now, if I'm remembering correctly, I believe she does argue that sexual relationships between adults and children should be destigmatized. Not great. It was the 70s. Not great. She also has some weird ideas about racism. Um, Robin Morgan once tried to incite a mob to assault and murder a trans woman, so, what the fuck is wrong with you? Robin Morgan, like, she had anthologies of radical feminist writing, which are probably good. I haven't read them, but, yeah. Valerie Solanas. She gets what the fuck is wrong with you, but like she's kind of like funny, She wrote the Scum Manifesto, which argued that males were genetically inferior to females and should be genocided or something. I haven't fucking read it. Patricia Hill Collins is just so fantastic. Um, she is the author of Black Feminist Thought, along with a bunch of other works. She is just a really great scholar in terms of making Black feminist writing accessible and broad, covering a lot of bases. Black Feminist Thought is such a terrific book. I really like her criticisms of pornography in that book because I think they're a lot more measured and historically specific than Dworkin's criticisms of pornography. Collins is also especially great in the way she incorporates analysis of lesbians and heterosexism into her feminist analysis. Um, in Black Feminist Thought, at least, she mentions trans women a few times, and it's very clear that she doesn't know what she's talking about. So it's sort of like, well, it's nice that you mentioned trans women. You don't know anything about them, but at least you mentioned them. Um, and she has a really great article I've read called Assume the Position, which sort of analyzes the gendered forms of anti-black racism as they affect black women and black men. And kind of the thesis of that article is that the position for black women is the position in which they are raped, and for black men is the position in which they lay on the ground as they are arrested by a police officer. And she sort of draws parallels between those two experiences. And that essay is brilliant. And that essay is in a book called Black Sexual Politics, which I've been meaning to read and haven't gotten around to yet. So Patricia Hill Collins is great. Now, Audre Lorde, B tier. And I'm sorry, people really like Audre Lorde. Audre Lorde wrote the book Sister Outsider. And, her criticisms of racism in American feminism are really insightful. The way that she analyzes that, that she extends feminism to discuss black women's experiences is great. She has some great essays. Sister Outsiders is a good book. The reason that I'm not personally a huge Audre Lorde fan is because she's definitely working within the cultural feminist milieu, which assumes that there's some sort of essence of womanhood and there's some sort of female spirituality. And I just ultimately don't fuck with that. Audre Lorde liked Mary Daly. And even though Audre Lorde did criticize the racism in Mary Daly's work, she didn't really have criticisms of Daly's other ideas. And I just don't, Audre Lorde, like, I'm not the biggest fan. Monique Fatigue is great. She just has some really great ideas about the social construction of gender. Some of her ideas about lesbians are sort of wacky, but hey, it was the 80s. It's not great when she compares the word woman to the N word. I don't love when she does that. Susan Brown Miller is really fantastic. I'm currently reading Against Our Will, and it's definitely a really important radical feminist text. I actually have it sitting on my desk right here. Against Our Will, Men, Women, and Rape by Susan Brown Miller. There's a lot of bioessentialism in it. There's a lot of bioessentialism in a way that makes it really easy to do a turfy reading of the book. There is some racism, which has been criticized by Kimberly Crenshaw and Angela Davis, and the racism's not great. It's not super overt. I think Brown Miller is mostly attuned to the issues of racism, but the way she discusses Emmett Till, not great. And the way she discusses the Scottsboro Boys, not great. And there's, so there's some parts of the book that haven't aged well, but it's a very solid book and a very important radical feminist book. So that's everyone. We ended up with kind of a lopsided tier list. We only got one C and no D's. I'm just thinking, like, do we want to move anyone around? No. I don't know. I think the reason there's not really any C's or D's is just because those are people who are kind of unremarkable. Like, I don't know. Who's like a C tier feminist? Maybe Gloria Steinem's like D tier. There we go. So that's the long version of my feminist tier list. People, when I did the short version, people wanted a longer version, so there you go.